This is the pilot to the Forge podcast by your host, Taz Syed. I hope you enjoy it. Hello, this is your host, Taz Syed, and welcome to the Forge podcast. For those of you who don't know, the Forge podcast is where we explore many different topics such as games, films, and stuff like that, and put our own spin and takes on them when it comes to creating them. Now today, for our pilot episode, I think I got a topic that might resonate with a few of you. That, of course, being video games. Now, I love them. Some of you I know love them. But how do we go about creating them? And that's what I want to explore in today's episode. Now, first of all, what makes a good game? In my opinion, a good game is very focused and very on the point about what it wants to deliver to the players. For example, I don't find games with a lot to do really fun, because that means the devs might have had to sort of neuter these options and make them a little less fun instead of focusing on one plot. I'd say Far Cry is a good example of this. There's two methods that are usually fun, that is stealth or murder. However, in the more recent games, when you're given like 20 options, which of those are actually fun? In my opinion, I only find those first two fun, which was sneaking and killing. Now, I feel like focus is an important thing because if you try to branch out too much, it'll cause your game to overall suffer, as it doesn't really have a core identity. So let us first find our core identity for our game. Now, I really love games with atmosphere, with feeling as you go through them. So, I decided to pick a horror game for the game that I'm going to be creating. Of course, if you wish to make any other genre of games, don't worry, this will help you, as this will have some advice for general game design or game making. For horror games, the genre that we're going to select for today's episode, how do we do that? What makes a good horror game? In my opinion, horror games aren't really defined by jump scares or instant scares. Horror games, I feel like, are more about the atmosphere and the rising tension. A good example of this is actually Silent Hill, specifically Silent Hill 2. The feeling you have when you make your way through this fog-ridden town, not a soul in sight as you wander aimlessly, seems very atmospheric and really touches you. You see these horrific monstrosities beneath the fog, your visibility blurred as you make your way through this strange town. It feels like a dream, yet at the same time, a nightmare. And I really love that atmosphere, and I really love how that can be applied. I really love how it can also tell a story and make the player feel it, as one of the important things is making the player feel what you want them to feel, to truly immerse themselves. Now, for our game today, that will be very important. We'll be sure to add that element of creeping tension. Next, let's figure out what kind of gameplay do we want. Do we want the player walking around? Do we want them actively doing stuff like puzzles or combat? What's our main gameplay loop? For me personally, I want to add first-person shooter elements, and I want this to be a first-person shooter. The reason why is because I really want to immerse the player. And as a game dev, you gotta figure out why you want a certain... For example, the reason why I want a first-person shooter is I want a little bit of that power fantasy and that gameplay similar to most tactical games like Ready or Not, where you're peeking behind corners, where you're being very careful. And I feel like that element, mixed with horror games and the general atmosphere of Silent Hill, will produce a mighty fine result. With that being said, how will we fit that first-person shooter gameplay, which generally promotes power fantasy and the ability to be whatever you want and be an absolute murder machine, while also retaining that horror? If we focus on one or the other, it'll cause a major rift. That is why another important element is cohesion. making sure what elements you do have adhere and flow to each other together. For example, in a game that has excellent adventure and roleplay, it would be very jarring if there were puzzle elements shoehorned in. That would just feel like an extra feature that the developer is just shoving in there, just for the sake of it. Instead, we want to think about how these elements work together and overall fit a bigger picture. Let's take our horror game, for example. I propose that in order to make the first-person shooter elements fit the horror, why don't we limit player resources? The player will have to take care of ammo, have to track what bullets they have. Their gun wobbles and shakes when they aim, so it's not a perfect sight. There's an element of closeness and almost claustrophobia as players make their way through hallways and corridors. Their character able to die in just a moment. However, the enemies also being able to die in just 1 or 2 shots. So it's a game of tactics and who can outwit who. And also, when it comes to this game, maybe adding other elements the player has to worry about, like sanity and other stuff. Now, I don't want to put in survival mechanics, because I feel like that's a bit too much, and I know other games like this one we're making do that. So instead, how about a risk/reward? Now, I'm taking inspiration from this other game, Dying Light, where the longer you stay out at night, the more rewards you get. What if we do that? What if we push the player to the most uncomfortable and dangerous spots by giving them good rewards? What I had in mind was the general layout of the world, of the levels, are the most dangerous areas that have environmental hazards like a slow poison that damages the player, something that possibly limits or changes their sight, enemies being much stronger, and those specific areas providing really good resources, like more ammo, more health packs, and much more. So there's that risk/reward. And I was thinking, rather than just a day and night cycle, an almost event that washes over the world, over the mission. For example, what I had in mind for a Grand Casino mission that is now sort of poisoned as this red mist fills the casino. Maybe there's a higher version of that mist that slowly rolls in and damages the player much more and poses as a much bigger threat. However, the longer the player goes through it, the more stronger they become, whether it be more health, or better navigation techniques, or possible loot inside that area. As they become stronger, the longer they remain in that. However, there's still that risk and tension as they're taking this huge gamble that could pay off horribly as their character dies. Another thing that I feel like will accentuate the horror is permadeath, where you might have multiple characters. However, if one character dies, they're dead. One character dies, they're pretty much gone forever, and you have to pick another one. I feel like that'll also accentuate the horror, as it will make players think more about what they do and more about their characters themselves and their needs. Now, when it comes to encounter design, I would say focus on the long term rather than the short term. Take our game, for example. Instead of just putting powerful enemies everywhere, what I kind of wanted to do was the enemies die easily, so 1 or 2 doesn't pose a challenge as you just go bang bang. But the challenge is when you run out of resources and run out of ammo. Because ammo is going to be really scarce, everything you gain will be makeshift and really prone to breaking. So instead, it's more of a choice, like, do I really want to spend this ammo on this one guy when I don't have much left? And I think that poses really interesting gameplay opportunities as you navigate this mysterious world. Now, these tidbits can fit any game. These tidbits can help anyone creating any type of game, whether it be a platformer, an RPG, and many more genres as you figure out these base elements. The number one advice I have is to think of the player. Think of their experience and how you want to sort of showcase it. It's similar to how a filmmaker goes into the lens of the audience, thinks about what they'll see, what they'll think about, and use that to sort of help enhance your game and enhance the story it brings. Simple stuff like good audio design, even what type of visuals you use, have major impacts. For example, this game, I would use low poly visuals to accentuate the feeling of horror, as you don't know what's in the fog. You don't know what this thing looks like, but you just see it running towards you. It causes panic as you quickly raise your rifle and shoot whatever's approaching you, due to that panic and due to not being able to see what that thing is. But I've been talking non-stop. How would we apply this? And that, my listeners, is what I have for you today in an audio sample. I hope you enjoy it. You make your way through the desecrated casino. The once bright and vibrant casino is now desolate and empty. The once filled booths and games now silent. The radio still sings as if it was alive. However, the song has been long distorted. You keep your rifle to your side as you make your way through the halls of the casino. The singing and laughter of the original residents still ring throughout the casino. However, equally as much as a dead silence. You hear strange noises to your sides as you feel something creeping nearby. However, you don't see it, as the smog and the red mist that fills the casino blinds you. You can only see 15 feet in front of you. Your hands are shaking as you go through noise. The wailing of the monsters continue as you quickly load your rifle and check how much ammo you have. Then you make your way through the corridors. And then you see something emerge from the mist. It's almost like a reflex as you raise your rifle and launch 2 shots at the approaching monster. As it falls to the ground, you see how it was once human. You can see its once vibrant eyes turn dark and sullen. You see its once gentle hands turn long and calloused, as this thing is no longer human. With those shots, you weren't sure how many people heard it, how many things might be making their way. You also scold yourself for wasting 2 bullets. As you hear the sirens of the casino, you know tonight's going to be a long night, as the event, the gala, has begun. And that is how I would showcase my horror game. Of course, this is just a small snippet, as there will be much more areas and designs. However, I just wanted to show you how we took those elements that we talked about before and really invested and implemented them into the gameplay. The player scolding themselves for wasting 2 shots, the gentle ambiance as the player's on edge, the shaking of the gun causes panic as something suddenly jumps out. And I hope you take this as inspiration of sorts in order to make your own games. Think about what the player might experience and how you might tell it. Think about what the player might feel actually in between, as in our horror game there would be very little safe spaces, so the players will value them more and more. But that is all I have for today's episode. I do hope you enjoy it, and I hope this has helped you a lot when it comes to making your own games and pursuing your own passions. And this is your host, Taz Syed, signing out. This podcast has been brought to you by Forsyth Central Studios.